Let me ask you something, and I don't want you to answer me right away. Just sit with it for a second. When was the last time you woke up and your first instinct wasn't to reach for your phone, not to check the time, not to turn off the alarm, but that reflex, that almost automatic movement where your hand searches across the bedsheet like it already knows where the screen is, like it has its own memory separate from you? Because if you're being honest, most mornings don't really begin with you anymore. They begin with that small rectangle lighting up your face in a dark room. And before your feet even touch the floor, before your back straightens, before your mind has a chance to ask, what matters today? You've already stepped into a stream of other people's lives, other people's noise, other people's urgency, and it feels normal, doesn't it? So normal that you don't even question it, like grabbing your keys before leaving the house, like checking your wallet. Except this one thing, this one habit, it doesn't just sit quietly in your routine. It reaches deeper, it sets the tone, like the first song on a long drive that somehow decides the mood of the entire trip. And most people don't realize this because nothing explodes. Nothing breaks in a dramatic way. There's no warning sign flashing red, just small shifts, subtle ones, the kind you only notice when it's already been happening for a while. Like when your electricity bill slowly creeps higher each month, and you don't think much of it until one day you open it and pause a little longer than usual. And that's how this works too, except instead of money, it's your attention, your focus, your ability to sit still without feeling like something is missing. And here's the uncomfortable part, the part people tend to brush off. It's not that you're weak, it's not that you lack discipline, it's that your brain has learned something, quietly, consistently, every single morning. It has learned that stimulation comes before reality, that before you even face your own thoughts, you get fed something quick, something easy, something that doesn't ask anything from you. And over time, that becomes the baseline, like drinking coffee that's a little too sweet every day until regular coffee starts to taste like nothing. And then you wonder why plain moments feel empty, why silence feels heavy, why a simple task like sitting down to work without checking your phone first feels harder than it should. And you might tell yourself it's just a bad habit, something small, something you can fix anytime you want. But if that were true, you would have already fixed it, wouldn't you? You would have had at least one morning where you woke up, saw your phone, and just left it there, untouched. Not out of force, not out of discipline, but because you genuinely didn't feel the need to pick it up. And if you can't remember the last time that happened, then maybe it's worth asking a different question. Not, why am I so distracted, but what have I trained myself to depend on? Because habits like this don't show up overnight. They build quietly, layer by layer, like dust settling on a shelf you don't clean often. And one day, you run your finger across it and realize how much has been there all along. And mornings, they're supposed to be something else. They're supposed to belong to you, not in some idealistic, perfect life kind of way, but in a very real, practical sense. It's the only part of the day that hasn't been touched yet. No meetings, no messages, no expectations, just you and a clean slate. And what you do in those first few minutes, it matters more than people like to admit, because it's not about productivity, it's about direction. It's about whether you start your day deciding what deserves your attention, or whether you let something else decide it for you. And most people, without realizing it, they've handed that decision away every single morning, in exchange for something that feels harmless, something that feels like a small comfort, like sitting on the edge of your bed for just a minute, that somehow turns into 10, 15, 20. And by the time you finally stand up, there's already this quiet rush in your chest, like you're behind on something, even though the day hasn't really started yet. And that feeling, that subtle pressure, it follows you. Into the shower, into your commute, into your first conversation. It's like carrying a weight you didn't notice picking up. And here's where it gets even more interesting, because people often think the problem is what they see on their phones, the content, the apps, the endless stream of information. But that's only part of it. The deeper issue is what it replaces. It replaces that small window of stillness where your mind would normally wake up slowly, where thoughts come in uninvited, where you might remember something important, or question something you've been avoiding, or just sit there for a moment and feel present in your own life. And when you remove that space, when you fill it immediately with noise, your brain adapts. It stops expecting silence, it stops tolerating it, and over time, it starts to reject it. like a body that hasn't stretched in years, suddenly resisting any movement that goes beyond what it's used to. And that's why 2 minutes without your phone can feel longer than it actually is. Not because time has changed, but because your tolerance has. And you might not notice it during the day, when everything is busy and loud, but it shows up in small ways, like when you're waiting in line and your hand automatically reaches into your pocket, or when you sit down to eat and feel the urge to watch something even if you're not really interested, or when you try to focus on a single task and your mind starts looking for an exit, any exit, just to break the stillness. And all of that, it traces back to these small decisions, repeated over and over, especially in the morning when your brain is most impressionable, when it's setting patterns for the hours ahead. And I'm not saying your phone is the enemy. That would be too simple, too easy to dismiss. The real issue is how unconsciously it has become part of your identity, part of your routine in a way that feels non-negotiable, like brushing your teeth or locking your door. Except this one thing, it doesn't just protect you or keep you clean. It pulls you, gently but persistently, into a cycle where your attention is always being guided, always being nudged, and rarely chosen. And the reason I'm asking you to think about this, really think about it, is because change doesn't start with action. It starts with awareness, with that slight discomfort when you recognize something you've been ignoring, like noticing a crack in the wall you walk past every day. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And that's where this begins. Not with a drastic decision, not with deleting apps or making promises you won't keep, but with a simple, honest observation that maybe, just maybe, the way you start your day isn't as harmless as it seems. That maybe those first few minutes are shaping more than you realize. And that maybe the question isn't whether you're addicted or not, but whether you've been living on autopilot for so long that you forgot what it feels like to actually choose how your day begins. There's this guy I knew, not someone extraordinary, not the kind of person you'd stop and look at twice if he passed you on the street. Just a regular man moving through a regular life. His name was Min, mid-30s, worked in an office that looked like every other office you've seen. Rows of desks, fluorescent lights that hum softly if you sit long enough to notice, a coffee machine in the corner that always smells stronger than the coffee actually tastes. And his days, they followed a pattern so predictable you could almost set a clock by it. Except the part that mattered most, the part that quietly shaped everything else, happened before he even stepped out the door. It started in that small window between sleep and waking, when the world is still quiet, when the air feels a little heavier, like it hasn't fully decided to become morning yet. And that's where his routine lived, not the one he told people about, not the one that sounded productive and put together, but the real one, the one that unfolded when no one was watching. His alarm would go off at 6:30, a sound he had grown to dislike but also depend on, the kind of relationship people have with things they can't avoid. He'd reach out, not fully awake, eyes still half closed, and turn it off. And for a brief second, just a brief one, there was silence, the kind that feels almost unfamiliar if you don't let yourself sit in it often. And that's where things could have gone differently. That tiny gap where he could have stretched, or sat up, or just taken a breath and let his mind catch up with his body. But he never stayed there long enough for that to happen, because almost immediately, his hand would shift, just slightly, just enough to find the phone again. Not for the alarm this time, but for everything else. And it wasn't a decision, not really. It didn't feel like one. It felt closer to instinct, like scratching an itch before you even realize you're doing it. He'd unlock the screen, and that soft glow would hit his face in the dim light of the room. And just like that, the day had already begun without him. Notifications lined up like people waiting at a bus stop, each one asking for a little bit of his attention. Messages, headlines, short videos that promised something quick and easy, something that didn't require him to think too much. And he'd tell himself, quietly, almost like a habit of reassurance, just a few minutes. The kind of lie that doesn't feel like a lie because you've said it so many times before. And at first, it was just that, a few minutes, back when he first started doing it, back when it still felt like a choice. But habits have a way of stretching themselves, of slowly taking up more space without asking for permission, like clutter building up on a desk, one item at a time until you suddenly realize there's no room left to work. And before he knew it, those few minutes turned into 10, then 15, sometimes 20. And during that time, his body stayed still, but his mind kept jumping, from one thing to another, never settling. never staying long enough to feel anything deeply. Just quick hits, small bursts, like sipping different drinks without ever finishing a glass. And when he finally put the phone down, it wasn't because he felt done. It was because something else forced him to stop. The clock. The realization that he was running late again. And that's when the rush would start. The kind that tightens your chest just a little. Not enough to panic, but enough to make everything feel slightly off. He'd get up quickly, movements less deliberate now, more reactive, brushing his teeth while thinking about the time, pulling on a shirt that he hadn't properly checked, grabbing a cup of coffee that he barely tasted, because his mind was already somewhere else, already trying to catch up with a day that felt like it had a head start on him. And this wasn't a one-time thing. It wasn't an occasional slip, it was every day, or almost every day, to the point where it became invisible to him, like background noise you stop hearing after a while. And by the time he stepped out of the house, locked the door, and joined the flow of people moving through the city, there was already this subtle fatigue sitting in him. Not physical, not the kind that comes from lack of sleep, but something else, something harder to name, like his mind had already done too much without actually accomplishing anything. And when he got to work, that feeling didn't go away. It followed him, quietly, settling into the spaces between tasks. He'd sit down at his desk, open his laptop, look at the list of things he needed to do, emails waiting to be answered, reports that required focus, decisions that needed a clear head. And for a moment, just a moment, he'd feel the weight of it, the awareness that this was the work that mattered, the kind that could actually move things forward. But then, almost like a reflex, his attention would drift, a quick check of his phone, just to see if there was anything new. And of course there always was. Something small, something insignificant, but enough to pull him in. And that's how it went, back and forth, between what he needed to do and what felt easier to do. And the more it happened, the harder it became to stay with the difficult things. Not because he didn't understand their importance, but because his brain had started to expect something else, something quicker, something more immediate. And every time he chose the easy option, even for a few seconds, it reinforced that expectation, like taking a shortcut so many times that the longer path starts to feel impossible. And he didn't see it as a problem, not at first. He saw it as normal, something everyone did, something that came with the way life worked now, always connected, always updated, always in motion. But there were small signs, subtle ones, the kind you notice only if you slow down enough to pay attention. Like how he struggled to sit through a meeting without checking his phone at least once. Or how reading a long document felt more tiring than it used to. Or how even during conversations, part of his mind seemed to be elsewhere, waiting for the next chance to shift focus. And outside of work, it didn't change much. Evenings were filled with the same pattern, a kind of low-level distraction that stretched across hours, scrolling, switching between apps, watching things he wouldn't remember the next day, telling himself it was how he relaxed, how he unwound after a long day. But if you looked closely, really closely, there was a difference between rest and escape. And what he was doing leaned more toward the latter, not fully present, not fully engaged, just passing time in a way that felt effortless but left him oddly empty, like eating a meal that fills you up but doesn't satisfy you. And when night came, when his body started signaling that it needed sleep, there was always that one more moment, one more video, one more check, a quiet negotiation with himself that he rarely won. And before he knew it, the clock had moved further than he intended, pushing his rest further away, setting up the next morning to feel just a little heavier. And then, the cycle would begin again, almost seamlessly, as if it had its own rhythm independent of his awareness. And the thing is, if you had asked him at any point whether something was wrong, he might have hesitated, might have said he felt a bit tired, maybe a bit distracted, but nothing serious, nothing worth worrying about, because from the outside, everything looked fine. He showed up, he did his job, he kept up with his responsibilities. But beneath that surface, there was a slow shift happening. Not dramatic, not obvious, just a gradual change in how he related to his own time, his own attention, and most importantly, his own sense of control. Because the more he followed that pattern, the less it felt like he was choosing it, and the more it felt like something he was simply responding to. And that's how it often begins, not with a clear moment of realization, but with small, repeated actions that slowly shape the way you move through your day, until one day, if you're lucky, you pause long enough to notice it, to see the pattern for what it is, and to ask yourself whether this is really how you want to keep living, or if somewhere along the way, you've given up more than you intended, in exchange for something that never quite gives back as much as it takes. There was a night, not special on the surface, no storm outside, no dramatic phone call, nothing that would make you remember it on a calendar, just another weekday folding into the next. The kind of night where the city hums a little softer but never really sleeps, and Min was lying there in his bed, the room dim except for that familiar glow resting inches from his face, the kind of light that doesn't fill the room, just isolates you inside it, like sitting alone under a street lamp while everything else fades into shadow. And his thumb kept moving, slow, almost mechanical now, not excited, not curious, just continuing, like a habit that had outlived its purpose but hadn't been told to stop. And if you had asked him in that moment what he was watching, he probably couldn't have told you clearly. Not because it was complicated, but because none of it stayed long enough to matter. One clip blending into another, one voice replacing the last. Nothing sticking, nothing settling, just a steady stream passing through him without leaving much behind. And the strange thing was, he wasn't enjoying it, not really. There was no laughter, no genuine reaction, just a blank kind of attention, like chewing food long after it's lost its taste. And somewhere between one swipe and the next, something in him slowed down just enough to notice that. Not loudly, not like a sudden realization you see in movies, but quietly, like when you're walking and you suddenly become aware of your own footsteps. And for a second, his thumb paused midair, hovering above the screen. And in that small gap, that tiny interruption in the pattern, a thought slipped in. Simple, almost too simple. Why am I still doing this? And it didn't come with judgment, didn't come with guilt, just curiosity. The kind that feels unfamiliar when you haven't asked yourself honest questions in a while. And he looked at the screen, really looked this time. Not through it, not past it, but at it. And it felt different, like noticing the scaffolding behind a billboard you've seen 100 times without thinking about how it stands. And for the first time in a long while, the content lost its grip. Not because it changed, but because he did. Just slightly, just enough to see it for what it was. A loop, a pattern designed to keep going, not to finish, not to satisfy, just to continue. And that's when another thought followed, slower this time, heavier. I'm not even choosing this anymore. And that one stayed a little longer, settled a little deeper, because it pointed to something he hadn't fully admitted to himself before. That somewhere along the way, this thing that started as a choice had become something else, something closer to a default, like breathing in stale air because you forgot what fresh air feels like. And he shifted slightly in his bed, the sheets rustling under him. And for a moment, he considered putting the phone down. Not dramatically, not as a big decision, just a small action, placing it on the table beside him and letting the night be quiet again. But as soon as that thought appeared, something else followed right behind it, a subtle discomfort, almost like a resistance. Not strong enough to stop him physically, but enough to make the idea feel inconvenient, like standing up to turn off a light when you're already comfortable where you are. And that's when it clicked in a way that felt different from before. Not intellectual, not something he had heard in a video or read somewhere, but something he felt directly, that the pull wasn't coming from the content itself, it was coming from inside him, from a place that had grown used to being fed constantly, like a muscle that had forgotten how to rest. And the silence, the simple act of doing nothing, of just lying there without stimulation, suddenly felt heavier than it should have. Not unbearable, but noticeable. Like the weight of a bag you've been carrying for so long, you only realize it when you try to put it down. And he let his thumb drop, the screen still glowing, but his attention shifting slightly inward. And in that space, small observations started to surface, things he hadn't connected before. Like how his mornings always began with the same pattern, how his workdays felt scattered even when the tasks were clear, how his evenings disappeared without leaving much behind. And it wasn't that any single moment was terrible, none of it felt like a crisis. But when you lined them up, when you looked at the pattern as a whole, there was a kind of emptiness running through it, a lack of depth, like a conversation that never goes beyond small talk. And the more he sat with that, the clearer it became that this wasn't about being entertained. It wasn't even about passing time. It was about avoiding something. Not something dramatic, not a big fear or a hidden trauma, just the simple experience of being alone with his own thoughts. And that realization didn't hit like a shock, it settled slowly, like dust in a quiet room. And with it came a different kind of awareness, that all those moments he thought were helping him relax, helping him unwind, were actually doing something else. They were keeping him in a state where he never had to fully engage, never had to sit with discomfort long enough to understand it. And that's when the idea of rest started to feel a little off. Because what he had been calling rest didn't leave him refreshed. It left him drained in a subtle way, like waking up from a nap that was too long, where your body feels heavier instead of lighter. And he thought about the last time he had sat in silence without reaching for something, without filling the space immediately, and he couldn't remember, not clearly. Maybe it had been weeks, maybe months, and that absence, that gap, suddenly felt more significant than all the time he had spent scrolling, because it pointed to something missing, not something taken away by force, but something gradually replaced. And he shifted again, this time sitting up slightly, the phone still in his hand, but no longer the center of his attention, and he looked around the room. The same room he woke up in every day, the same walls, the same objects, but in that moment, it felt a little different. Not because anything had changed physically, but because his awareness had shifted just enough to notice the quiet, to feel it instead of immediately covering it up. And it wasn't as uncomfortable as he expected, not once he stayed with it for more than a few seconds. In fact, there was something steady about it, something grounding, like standing still after moving for a long time. And that's when the real twist settled in, not as a dramatic conclusion, but as a quiet understanding that the problem had never been the phone itself. It was the way he had been using it to avoid the very space where clarity lives. That small, often ignored space where you can actually hear your own thoughts without interruption. And by filling it constantly, he had trained himself to feel uneasy without it, to seek out noise even when he didn't need it. And that's why stopping felt harder than continuing. Not because continuing was better, but because it was familiar. And familiar has a way of disguising itself as comfortable, even when it isn't. And he looked back at the screen one more time, the endless stream still waiting, still ready to pull him back in. And for a moment, he just held it there, not acting, not reacting, just noticing the urge, noticing how it rose and fell, how it tried to nudge him back into the pattern. And instead of immediately giving in, he stayed with it, just for a few seconds longer than usual. And in those few seconds, something shifted. Not a complete transformation, not a sudden breakthrough, just a small crack in the routine. A moment where he saw the pattern instead of being inside it. And that, more than anything else, was new. Because once you see something clearly, even for a brief moment, it becomes harder to go back to not seeing it at all. And as he finally placed the phone down beside him, the room returning to its natural dimness, the silence settling back in, there was no dramatic sense of victory, no feeling of having solved anything, just a quiet awareness that something had changed. Not outside, not in his circumstances, but in the way he related to them. And that change, small as it was, carried a different kind of weight, the kind that doesn't shout for attention, but stays with you, lingering in the background, waiting to be noticed again the next time your hand reaches out automatically, the next time you find yourself in that same space between action and awareness, where, for a brief moment, you actually have a choice. There's a kind of tiredness people don't talk about much, not the one you fix with sleep, not the one that goes away after a weekend off, but the quiet kind that sits somewhere behind your eyes, like a fog that never fully lifts. And Min started to notice it not all at once, not like a sudden collapse, but in small, almost forgettable moments scattered across his days. Like when he sat at his desk staring at a document he had opened 10 minutes ago and still hadn't read past the first paragraph. Or when someone asked him a simple question and he needed a second longer than usual to respond. Not because he didn't know the answer, but because his mind felt like it had to travel a longer distance to get there, like walking through a crowded room just to reach a door that used to be right in front of you. And at first he brushed it off the way most people do, blamed it on sleep, on work, on stress, the usual explanations that feel reasonable enough to stop you from looking deeper. But the thing about this kind of fatigue is that it doesn't behave like the normal kind. It doesn't follow effort. It doesn't match what you've done. It shows up even on days when nothing particularly difficult has happened. And that's what started to bother him. That quiet mismatch between how much energy he had spent and how drained he felt. Like checking your bank account after a calm week and seeing less money than you expected. And one afternoon, it was during lunch again, he found himself sitting there with a meal in front of him that he didn't really taste. The kind you eat because it's time to eat, not because you're hungry. And around him, people were talking. The usual mix of complaints and small jokes. Conversations that drift in and out without asking much from you. And he picked up his phone out of habit, not even thinking about it, just something to fill the space. But this time, something slowed him down just enough to notice the movement itself, the way his hand reached, the way his fingers wrapped around the device before his mind had fully caught up. And he paused, just a second, holding it there. And in that pause, there was a question. Not loud, not urgent, just present. What am I actually looking for right now? And he didn't have a clear answer, not a specific one. No message he was waiting for, no update that mattered, just a vague sense of wanting something, anything, to shift his state. And that realization, simple as it was, carried a certain weight, because it pointed to a pattern that went beyond a single moment. It wasn't about this lunch break, or this day. It was about how often he had been doing this without noticing, reaching for something external to change something internal. And the more he sat with that thought, the more it connected to other parts of his day. Like how silence had started to feel uncomfortable in ways he couldn't quite explain. Like when he drove without music and felt an urge to turn something on almost immediately. Or when he sat in a quiet room and his mind began searching for something to latch onto. Not because there was anything wrong with the silence itself, but because he had become unfamiliar with it. Like a person who moves to a noisy city and forgets what true quiet sounds like. And there was one moment, a small one, that stayed with him longer than the others. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. No work, no obligations pressing in. Just time. The kind people say they wish they had more of. And he was sitting on the edge of his bed again, phone in hand, scrolling through things he wouldn't remember, when suddenly the screen froze for a second. A minor glitch, nothing unusual. But in that brief interruption, his reflection appeared faintly on the glass, just for a moment. His face layered under the images, and he caught it, not clearly, but enough to notice. And something about that image, that overlap between himself and the endless stream he had been consuming, made him stop, really stop this time. And he looked at his own face on the screen, not with judgment, not with criticism, just observation. And what he saw wasn't dramatic, no signs of distress, no obvious struggle, just a kind of flatness, a lack of presence, like someone sitting in a waiting room without knowing what they're waiting for. And that image stayed with him even after the screen refreshed and the content returned, because it revealed something he hadn't fully acknowledged before, that he had been there physically in all these moments, but not fully there mentally, always slightly elsewhere, always partially engaged. And that partial presence, repeated over days and weeks, had started to add up, creating this underlying sense of emptiness that didn't have a clear cause. And he began to see how it showed up in other ways, like how small inconveniences started to irritate him more than they used to. A delayed email, a slow connection, a minor mistake. Things that shouldn't have carried much weight but suddenly felt heavier. And he realized it wasn't the events themselves, it was his tolerance that had changed. His capacity to sit with discomfort, even small discomfort, had shrunk, like a muscle that weakens when it's not used. And every time something didn't go smoothly, his system reacted more quickly, more sharply, not because the situation demanded it, but because he had grown used to a constant level of stimulation that didn't include friction, didn't include waiting, didn't include effort. And when reality didn't match that expectation, it felt off, like stepping into a room where the temperature is slightly wrong. Not enough to cause harm, but enough to make you uneasy. And that's when another layer of understanding began to form, slower, deeper, that this wasn't just about distraction. It was about how he had been training himself to respond to life, not deliberately, not consciously, but through repetition, through small choices made over and over again. And those choices had shaped his baseline, what felt normal, what felt comfortable, what felt difficult. And sitting there, on that Sunday afternoon, with nothing urgent demanding his attention, he realized that the hardest thing for him to do in that moment wasn't work, wasn't solving a problem. It was simply doing nothing, just sitting without reaching for something, without filling the space. And that difficulty, that subtle resistance, said more than any external measure of productivity ever could, because it pointed to a loss, not of time, but of ease. The ease of being present without needing constant input. And he put the phone down, not as a grand decision, just as an experiment, placing it beside him and letting his hands rest. And at first, there was that familiar discomfort, a slight restlessness, like his mind was pacing in a small room, looking for something to do, something to grab onto. And he noticed how quickly thoughts tried to pull him back. Reminders, random ideas, the urge to check just one more thing, all of it rising and falling like waves. And instead of following them immediately, he stayed, just a little longer than usual, letting them pass without acting. And after a while, not long, but noticeable, something shifted. The restlessness softened, the urgency faded slightly. And underneath it, there was a different kind of feeling, quieter, more stable. Not exciting, not stimulating, but steady, like the feeling you get when you finally sit down after standing for too long. And in that space, he began to sense something he hadn't felt clearly in a while. A kind of presence that didn't depend on anything external, that didn't require constant input to sustain itself. And it wasn't dramatic. It didn't solve his problems. It didn't suddenly make everything clear, but it felt real in a way that the constant stream of content didn't. And that realization settled in slowly, that maybe what he had been chasing all this time, through endless scrolling and constant stimulation, wasn't actually satisfaction, but relief. Relief from the discomfort of being still. And by constantly avoiding that discomfort, he had made it stronger, more persistent, like ignoring a small leak until it spreads. And now, sitting there in that quiet room, he saw the cost more clearly, not in terms of lost hours or missed opportunities, but in the way it had shaped his experience of life, making simple moments feel incomplete unless they were filled, making silence feel like something to escape rather than something to enter. And as he sat there a little longer, letting the quiet settle around him, there was no sudden clarity, no final conclusion, just a deeper awareness of what had been happening beneath the surface. And that awareness, heavy and calm at the same time, stayed with him, not as a burden but as a kind of anchor, something he could return to, a reminder that the noise he had been living in wasn't the only way to exist, that beneath it, there was something else, something quieter, something steadier, waiting for him to notice it again. You know, the strange thing about all of this is that nothing in Min's life really collapsed. There was no dramatic turning point where everything fell apart and forced him to change. No big loss, no public failure, no moment where people around him pointed and said something was wrong. On the outside, things kept moving the same way they always had. He still woke up, still went to work, still paid his bills on time, still replied to messages, still showed up where he was expected to be. And if you looked at him from a distance, you wouldn't see a problem. You'd just see another person doing what people do, getting through the day, handling responsibilities, keeping things together. And maybe that's exactly why it took him so long to really face what was happening. Because the kind of loss he was dealing with didn't announce itself loudly. It didn't demand attention. It just slowly thinned out parts of his life that used to feel fuller, like watering a plant less and less each week until it's still standing, but no longer growing. And once he started noticing it, really noticing it, not just as a passing thought, but as something that showed up again and again, it became harder to ignore, harder to push aside with the usual explanations, because now it had a shape, a pattern, something he could recognize even in small moments, like when he reached for his phone without thinking and caught himself halfway through the motion, or when he sat down to work and felt that familiar pull to escape before he had even begun. And at first, that awareness didn't feel empowering the way people often describe it. It felt inconvenient, almost annoying, like noticing a ticking sound in a room that you can't unhear once it's pointed out. Because now every time he slipped back into the same pattern, there was a part of him watching it happen. A part that knew what was going on, even if the rest of him continued anyway. And that gap between knowing and doing, it's not comfortable. It doesn't feel like progress. It feels like friction, like trying to walk in a direction while something gently pulls you back the other way. And for a while, that's where he stayed, in that in-between space. Not fully lost in the habit anymore, but not fully free from it either. Just aware enough to see it, but not yet steady enough to change it consistently. And if you've ever been there, you know how that feels. It's not a clean break. It's messy, uneven. Some days you notice more. Some days you fall right back in without thinking. And then later, maybe at night, maybe in a quiet moment, you remember. And there's that brief sense of disappointment. Not dramatic, just a small drop in your chest. Like realizing you forgot something you meant to do. And the easy response, the one most people fall into, is to try and fix everything at once. To make a big decision, set strict rules, delete apps, create systems, draw lines in the sand. And for a few days, maybe it works. Maybe there's a sense of control, a feeling of starting fresh. But Min didn't go that route. Not because he was more disciplined, but because something in him had shifted just enough to see that the problem wasn't just the behavior. It was the relationship behind it. The way he had been using these small hits of stimulation to manage his internal state, to avoid discomfort, to fill gaps that he hadn't learned to sit with, and trying to cut it off completely. Without understanding, that would be like turning off a fan in a hot room, without opening a window. The air would just feel heavier, and he had felt that before, in smaller attempts. When he tried to force himself to stop and ended up feeling more restless, more irritated, like something inside him was being denied without being addressed. So instead of making a big move, he started with something smaller, something almost unnoticeable from the outside. He began paying attention to the moment before the action, that brief space where his hand would reach for the phone, where the urge would rise. And instead of immediately following it or trying to suppress it, he just watched it. Not in a formal way, not like a technique, just a simple awareness. There it is again. And at first, that didn't change much. The action still happened most of the time. He still picked up the phone, still scrolled, still drifted into the same patterns. But something subtle was different. The action was no longer invisible, it was seen, and that changed its weight slightly, like carrying a bag you've always had, but suddenly becoming aware of its heaviness. And over time, that awareness started to stretch that space just a little. The gap between impulse and action grew by a second, then two, sometimes just enough for a different choice to slip in. Not always, not consistently, but occasionally. And those small moments, they mattered more than they seemed, because they showed him that the pattern wasn't absolute, that there was room, however small, to move differently. And with that came a different kind of question. Not, how do I stop this completely, but what happens if I don't follow it this one time? And sometimes, he would put the phone back down, not dramatically, just a quiet decision, and sit there, letting the urge pass, feeling that slight discomfort rise and fall. And each time he did that, something inside him adjusted. Not in a way that felt exciting, but in a way that felt steady, like a muscle being used again after a long time. And slowly, very slowly, other parts of his day began to shift as well. Not because he forced them to, but because his baseline was changing. Mornings didn't always start with the phone anymore. Not perfectly, not every day, but often enough that he began to notice the difference. The way his mind felt a little clearer before being filled with noise. The way his thoughts had a chance to surface before being replaced. And work, it didn't suddenly become easy, but there were moments, small pockets of time, where he could stay with a task a little longer without needing to escape. And those moments, they built on each other, not in a straight line, but in a gradual accumulation, like saving small amounts of money over time and realizing one day that you have more than you expected. And even his evenings began to feel different, not because he eliminated distraction entirely, but because he became more aware of when he was using it and why. And sometimes, that awareness led him to choose something else, something quieter, something that didn't pull him in the same way. And it wasn't about becoming perfect. It wasn't about cutting out all forms of easy stimulation. It was about regaining a sense of choice, of being the one who decides, even if only in small moments. And that, more than anything else, was what had been missing. Not discipline, not willpower, but awareness followed by small, consistent shifts. And if you step back and look at it, the lesson isn't complicated. It doesn't require a complete overhaul of your life. It starts with something much simpler: noticing. Noticing how you begin your day. Noticing how often you reach for something without thinking. Noticing what you're trying to avoid in those moments. And asking yourself, quietly, without judgment, what happens if I just stay here for a little longer? And maybe nothing dramatic will happen. Maybe it will just feel slightly uncomfortable at first. Maybe your mind will wander. Maybe you'll still end up picking up your phone most of the time. But in that small space, in that act of noticing, something begins to change. Because you're no longer completely inside the pattern, you're also observing it. And that's where control starts to come back. Not all at once, not in a way that feels heroic, but in a way that is real and sustainable. And if there's one thing worth taking from all of this, it's not a rule or a system. It's a question, one you can carry with you into your own days, into those small, quiet moments that often go unnoticed. When your hand moves before your mind does, when the urge appears out of nowhere, and the question is simple, almost too simple. Am I choosing this, or am I just following it? And you don't have to answer it perfectly. You don't have to get it right every time. Just asking it is enough to begin. And if you find yourself coming back to that question more often, if you notice those small gaps growing just a little wider over time, then you're already moving in a different direction, even if it doesn't feel like it yet. And if this kind of conversation, this slower way of looking at things, makes sense to you, if it feels closer to something real than the usual noise, then stay with it. Not as a commitment you have to declare, just as a quiet decision to keep paying attention. Because in the end, the life you build isn't shaped by big moments alone. It's shaped by these small, repeated choices, the ones no one else sees, the ones that happen in the space between impulse and action. And maybe, just maybe, that's where everything starts to change.